Okay, we are the Gold Diggers, and we're presenting on Flourish, Chapter 1 by Martin Seligman. I'm Allie.
I'm Olivia.
I'm Valeria.
I'm Pascal.
I'm Haley.
So, at the beginning of the book, Martin starts off by telling a story about how he formed positive psychology, and he tells a story that he received mysterious funding from a famous millionaire who wanted to fund an offbeat idea about psychology and what makes life worth living. So he came up with positive psychology. And he begins by telling his thoughts on happiness. And he references some really famous names in the area. He says, Thales thought that everything was water. Aristotle thought that all human action was to achieve happiness. Nietzsche thought that all human action was great power, and Freud thought that all human action was to avoid anxiety. And he explains the mistake of monism. So this means that the mistake of all human actions come down to just one, and that contradicts the idea that the right answer is the simplest. So monism is fatal to these four theories and to happiness. So Seligman explains his view of happiness. He said that his originally correlated most strongly with Aristotle, but he says that he actually detests the word happiness, which is overused, that is almost become meaningless. It's an unworkable term for science or for any practical goal, such as education, therapy, public policy, or just changing your personal life. And he wanted to make those terms workable. So he said the first step in positive psychology was to dissolve the monism of happiness into more workable terms. And he explained that understanding happiness requires a theory. And he published a book in 2002 that originally omitted success and mastery. So this book was about changing that theory.
So he talks about the difference of his previous book, which is Authentic Happiness versus Well-Being Theory. And the original theory, which is Authentic Happiness, talked about positive emotion, which is known as the pleasant life. That consists of pleasure, rapture, ecstasy, warmth, and comfort. The other aspect of this theory was engagement, and this is also known as the engagement life, which is in flow activity. So that's when time stops, when you play music, when you lose self-consciousness during an absorbing activity. The last one is meaning, and that is known as the meaningful life, which is where you desire to serve more than yourself. This can be shown by the involvement in religion, political party, being green, Boy Scouts. And in authentic happiness theory, there are three flaws that he confronted within his theory. The first one is that happiness is connected with being in a cheerful mood. He stated that that's false because you can be, calm, collected, and also be very happy and experiencing happiness within you, but not outwardly be showing it. Number two is the present state is a measurement of happiness. So he was stating that whenever people are asked and they're in a good mood, if they're happy, they say that they are, instead of actually taking into account everything within their life. So they actually will just say, oh, I'm in a happy mood, even though other circumstances might actually mean that they aren't. And then number three, when people have positive emotion, engagement, and meaning, they act for their own sake. He said that this is actually false because a lot of people do charity work, which is for other people's sake. And then the well-being theory talks about how well-being is a construct and happiness is a thing. So well-being denies that positive psychology is a thing, but instead that each element contributes to the overall idea of well-being, but does not define it. So an example of that would be freedom, because it's a huge concept. And so freedom would be the construct. And then with happiness, the thing, the example of that would be laws. So there are laws that make up to define freedom. So he stated that authentic happiness theory is an attempt to describe the real thing based on three common factors.
Okay. So he continues by saying that as happiness is part of well-being, he continues by saying that happiness alone doesn't give you life meaning. So he asks the question of like what enables you to cultivate your talents, build deep relationships, feel pleasure, and contribute meaningfully to the world. Um, like in essence, what allows you to flourish. So he came up with the foundation of like positive psychology, the well-being theory. Um, he named it PERMA. It's a PERMA framework. It's positive emotions, which is the feeling of love, joy, and pleasure. Engagement, which is being in flow and focus on our activities. Relationships, more specifically positive relationships, which is having healthy, supportive, rewarding connections with others. Meaning, giving significance to the events in our lives. And accomplishments, attaining goals that support our core values.
So the next part we're going to talk about is the kindness exercise. Um, the first part was a quote that George Valiant, a Harvard psychologist, was talking about. The master strength is a capacity to be loved. Pretty much here, it's the sense that security and safety gives us more room for happiness to grow because we feel more comfortable in the lives that we live. The second point saying being social is the most successful form of higher adaptation. And this is a point that was being talked about when they said pretty much how the human race has come so far because we're able to communicate with one another and work as a group. So we can see this in individuals and in terms of like this project, group projects and being able to communicate, you can get goals done together. And then the third point was talking about positive relationships are one of the 5 basic elements of well-being. We're going to look at the summary of well-being theory. And pretty much it was saying there are 5 measurable elements of well-being. It's positive emotion, engagement, relationships with other people, meaning, and achievement. All these kind of create this foundation that helps us support our lives and creates room for us to be more happy as individuals. The well-being theory is about the 5 pillars, like I just said, and pretty much the foundational support that makes us well-rounded, helps us enjoy the lives that we live with one another, with our families and our friends, and pretty much everything that's going on around us.
So the importance of well-being, the well-being theory is great because it's flexible to fit everyone individually. But the happiness theory is very selfish. It's only talking about you and not the happiness of how you can interact with others. So Seligman's example for this is it is known that couples with children are on average less happier than those couples without kids. And he says that if we only went by this, which would give us the maximum happiness, humankind would have died out a long time ago. So we don't go by the happiness theory. Flourishing as the goal of positive psychology. So in terms of the happiness theory, the goal would be to increase the amount of happiness in our lives in the world. But in the well-being theory, the goal is to increase the amount of flourishing in our own life and in the world. And Felicia Hubert and Timothy So of University of Cambridge, they gave us a definition for this. And they said, to flourish, you must have all the core features and 3 of the 6 additional features. And I put them down here below. The core features are positive emotion, engagement, interest, meaning, and purpose. And then the additional features are self-esteem, optimism, resilience, vitality, self-determination, and positive relationships. So they had these different things administered to over 2,000 adults in Europe, in all different countries in Europe. And just to see the citizens and see who had the most flourishing of the others. And they found that in Denmark, they had the most at 33%, and the lowest was Russia at 6%. But you can see off to the side, those are the kind of answers that could be given for the higher side of optimism and meaning and purpose and things like that. So in conclusion, the well-being theory is meant to measure and build human flourishing.
So we have some quiz questions here. The first one, which is not one of the 5 measurable elements of well-being? And we have A, positive emotion, B, engagement, C, relationships, D, meaning, E, optimism, F, achievement. Question 2, we have which 2 qualities were not included in Seligman's original theory of happiness? The answers there, we have A, success and mastery, B, peace and love, C, truth and meaning, D, connection and intimacy, E, positivity and trust. Question 3, acts of kindness, connecting with others, and sharing laughter, joy, pride, or purpose provide deep and lasting feelings of well-being are characteristics of which one of the 5 PERMA elements? A, relationships, B, meaning, C, positive emotions, D, engagement, E, accomplishment. And then on the next slide, we got question 4, which is not a core feature mentioned by Hupper and So. And then we have A, purpose, B, engagement, C, positive emotion, D, meaning, E, optimism. And question 5, what is the difference between well-being and happiness? A, positive emotion versus feeling, B, construct versus thing, C, interaction versus experience, D, excitement versus contentment, and E, habits versus hobbies.
And then for our application exercises, the first one is Alex is an incoming freshman at Point Loma Nazarene University. His major is undeclared. His hobbies include playing guitar, surfing, and writing. Although he has these hobbies, he feels like his life is lacking value and is trying to incorporate his passions with his major. What is Alex in search for? A, self-esteem, B, identity, C, meaning and purpose, D, optimism, or E, engagement. And then the next application exercise is Johnny has a reliable job and he's been in for 5 years. He has multiple hobbies and passions. However, when he goes out with his friends, they tend to put him down in social situations. What aspects of his life does Johnny need to work on? A, Johnny needs to correct his friends and tell them how to act. B, Johnny needs to work on positive relationships and befriending people that encourage him and love him for who he is. C, Johnny needs to just deal with it. D, Johnny needs to cut off his friends and find friends who will uplift him. E, Johnny needs to engage in ways to uplifting his self-esteem. So that's going to conclude our slides. And then if we go on to the next one, that has all the answers. Thank you, guys.